John Mark, is the internet making everything ugly and boring?
So the internet is not making everything ugly and boring. It's just making almost everything ugly and boring. No, so there's like 100 things going on, like 100 different things going on, and I think I was trying to process multiple things at once the other day when I was talking about that. But I think one thing that I'd like to talk about is this concept of the medium is the message. So I think initially, um, when I made that statement, I was thinking about how I want to talk about deep things. I don't know, you guys do too. I regularly talk about deep things with you guys, but every now and then I'm like, does it cheapen this to just to put it on the internet? Does it cheapen it? Because sometimes I watch other people talking about things that should be deep, and I'm like, man, you just made me not interested in this topic by simply posting it on the internet. Because sometimes it feels like when you're trying to share things on the internet, you have to share and market at the same time. It's like it used to be that you had like these things you wanted to share with the world. And so at first you got to like create awareness that you have something worth sharing, and then connect with people and then share it. And now those things are coming so close together that you kind of have to do it all at once. And so very often I feel like I have something important to say, but I got to make sure the first 3 seconds of it capture your attention. And sometimes the things you do to capture attention, like I wonder if it almost like demeans the actual thing that you're trying to say. You're like, hey, if I gotta like scream at you, right? Like, then do you really want to hear what I'm saying? So I think that was the initial thing, was like, I want to kind of talk. I like to talk about God. I like to talk about faith. And sometimes it's like, feels like when you're posting things about faith on the socials, it feels like you're marketing faith. And it's like, oh, that feels a little bit gross. But it also is like, if you are on the platform, you're either playing the game or you're not on the platform. Right.
Yeah.
And so that brings me to like maybe the next level, which is David Byrne. He's got a book called How Music Works. And sort of I guess you want to say the thesis of that book is how the environment actually has way more impact on the thing you make than most people realize. And his initial sort of example is how like birds in San Francisco over the last 50 to 100 years have changed the key of their song. Birds sing in a key. And they sing mostly, mark territory or whatever, but mostly they sing to mate, right? And so if they're singing in a city that's getting bigger and bigger and louder, then they need to be heard. So the birds literally over time have changed the key of the song they sing in so that they can be heard. And this is what's happening with the internet, right? The socials have become the only place we're allowed to have these big conversations in public, because no one else can hold anyone's attention, because these big behemoths are so scientifically tuned to gobbling up the attention of human beings that it feels like the only way to connect with people, right? And so when this is the only way to connect with people, then you have to change the key of your song if you want people to hear you anymore. And so I think what you see happening is you see people changing what they do more and more to fit with the way things work on the socials. And this isn't a new thing at all. As David Byrne points back, it's, the birds do it too. But my question is not whether or not the environment changes the things we make, but how is the current environment changing the things that we make? If the current environment values or rewards certain actions, right, then you're going to see that's going to inform the way you make what you make. And we all know that the current environment values or rewards attention, right? And nothing gets attention like negativity or some sort of big problem, right? Or something sort of wild and outrageous. But as more and more people do that, we have to double down on those things. But the things that I think you do to gain attention are not always very beautiful. And as an artist, we always had to do things. You always had the radio single, or you have to do the thing that gets attention. But then you sort of had this other stuff that came behind it, which is stuff you really care about, right? So we'll do promotional stuff to remind people we exist so that we can, share the things that matter to us with those people. But now it's like, it's so much work. That first part becomes the dominant thing, where all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, my artwork, or all the energy that I would put into making the things that matter, now I'm putting it all into getting attention, because the attention getting part is so all encompassing, right?
Yeah.
And so you see this with I think you see this in the way people write songs now. Like in the 90s, a lot of the bands, 90s, early 2000s, the bands had would have lyrics that were a lot more stream of consciousness, that were a lot more searching, that were a lot more abstract. You don't see that anymore. Like most songs that people write now sound more like commercials. They have a thesis, they have a thing they're saying, and they define their thesis, and they do it in very straightforward language. And I think the reason they do that is because that is the best way to get people's attention very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But in my opinion, those are not the most beautiful songs. Those are not the songs I return to over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing you'll see, I think that I actually like this trend, is that because people are living with their headphones on and noise is everywhere, there's a lot more contemplative sounding music that I think is gaining traction. Like I think people are spending more time with music that sort of lives with you. So this is the internet's doing a lot of things. So when I say it's not making everything boring and ugly, but it's making a lot of things boring and ugly. And there's some good and some bad. But I think you caught me on a day when I was really frustrated, because I want to make something beautiful. And I'm like, if I make something beautiful and just put it out there, like nobody is going to care, because no one's going to see it, because I'm not challenging anybody's politics, and I'm not having a hot take, and I'm not, I'm not doing any of the things that get your attention. And I just was really desperate that day to make something beautiful and not spend all day trying to like get people's attention.
Okay, so I hear a few problems that you're bringing up, and then Stephen, I'd love to kind of tag you in on piggybacking off any of that. So you have the initial problem that everybody experiences, that whether you're in woodworking, whether you make hot rods, whether you write a book, whether you write poetry, whether you make music, you have the initial challenge, I should say, of I'm making something that I think is valuable. How do I share it with others? So that is a question of attention, right? How do I gather eyes, ears, or whatever on the thing that I'm doing? And obviously the methods for that have changed over time. Those are always changing. The internet in particular, like social media, and I'd probably even say even more precisely, like short form content, has made the ways we primarily get attention changed. So you have that conundrum. And then you have the conundrum as somebody making something, that now you have this whole new like economy of attention that you have to give to making things to get attention to people, get attention from people to pull it towards the main thing you want to make, which splits your own attention, right? As someone making stuff. And that is immensely frustrating, because you're going like, I'm one of the things I make here are podcasts. I'm doing it now, right? We're getting a little meta, but I don't want to be thinking, even in our conversation together, I don't want to be thinking about what's going to make for the best clip out of this conversation, right? That changes it. I've noticed it in me, even as I'm like, as I have guests on and I'm interviewing them, since I've started to, I don't do a lot of clips, but since I've done some from time to time, I'm thinking, ooh, is that going to be a good clip? Take a mental note. Can I steer the conversation in such a way where it gets that punchy thing that's going to fit in 30 seconds? I don't like that. I don't like doing that. And then I don't like the amount of time it takes making, for lack of a better term, the marketing for the thing that you should be giving more of your attention to, which is the thing that you really believe is meaningful. Stephen, you've been doing this for a while, not only in making your own stuff, but you're really a coach, a leader to other people making things, helping them learn how to do that well in deeply meaningful ways. What's been challenging about this process for you?
Well, it's interesting even to hear what John Mark, what you said about, the medium becomes the message. And I think it's interesting. I would add to that, the medium not only becomes the message, but it also becomes an uninvited collaborator in the art. And suddenly we have this collaboration with what the internet values. We have this collaboration with how it tells us to think and how it tells us to create and the type of content that it rewards us for making. And as an artist and a little bit of a rebel, that's really problematic for me, but it's also the weight of that is so massive. How do you even stand in the midst of that? I made a statement recently. Actually, it was when you and I were hanging out a few weeks ago, John Mark, that I said analog is the new punk rock. you know, and I think that we're going to see movements toward analog in new ways, whether that is simply concerts taking place in the forest with no phones allowed, or whether it is creating new venues for content to be shared. I think that artists are going to get fed up with feeding the beast at some point, and I do think that analog is going to become the new punk rock. That might be a slow journey, and it might start underground and take another decade before something like that could get off the ground. But I know in my own experience of working in this modern environment, it's been very frustrating for me because I like to go really deep in the things that we talk about, and as you do, and sometimes that doesn't work in a 30-second clip. I have to get my question out in 30 seconds, and so it's been a bit frustrating as well to have to be a full-time content creator and to have to be a full-time artist, among other things. So, I mean, we could talk solutions and things like that, but, even hiring someone to take that on can be a solution. So we can just be the artist, but then you get into the economics of how feasible is that for independent artists. So I don't know that if I really offered an answer to the question you're posing, but I do think that there is an opportunity for artists and for creatives to begin thinking, how can we be a little more punk rock in this scene, and how can we actually create something that doesn't just have to feed the beast, or that doesn't have to align with you know this trauma hungry monster that
Mhm.
wants to keep us on an emotional high all the time, just to gain attention.
Yeah, I'm not hoping necessarily to jump right to solutions yet. I think it's really helpful. You guys are sharing pain points in this as
Yeah.
people deeply your life revolves around your art and the things that you make, and it is beautiful and valuable. It's worth sharing, and it's deeply meaningful. And you know, John Mark, I think there's a not just think, I think anybody would attest to this. There is a major difference in the experience of meaning, the spiritual transformation that takes place. I mean, we were just together a few months ago when you came to town, and your show that you did was incredibly meaningful, being a participant in it with a room of other people in like shared song, when people know the words and they're all singing together, and not just the singing together, the sight, the sound, the beautiful music that's made by you and the guys in the band. That can't be duplicated in your like 30-second clip that's trying to capture attention momentarily. So I think it's perfectly fine to just take some time here to process some of our pain points, because I think the pain points will help us identify the things that aren't actually giving us meaning. And I think even just discussing those pain points will help people feel permission to name those things too. And then as we kind of name the pain points, maybe as we name them with accuracy, they'll start to unfold possible potential solutions to addressing those pain points. So do you mind, John Mark, even just sharing, you're talking a little bit out of a place of frustration last week, going like, I want to make something meaningful. It's going to take time. It's going to take energy. It's probably going to take more financial resources than plopping an iPhone in front of my face and, getting out my guitar and trying to capture someone's attention or telling a funny joke for 30 seconds. Can you share a little bit more, open up maybe about just for you, even as an artist, somebody that makes something, where are the pain points for you right now in the way it's the landscape for you sharing what you make has changed, and maybe you're feeling like it might be changing you in ways you're not entirely excited about?
Yeah, totally. I think there's a number of things to talk about. I think first of all, I want to say that I still feel like I'm insanely privileged to have been able to grow this audience over the last 20, 25 plus years, because I was able to get into the music game back when it was easier to get into. I mean, and we could have a long conversation about that. It might have been the only window of time when I could have got in the way I got in, right? Because there was this convergence of old and new technology, and there's this moment when, if you're in the 60s, 70s, 80s, if you wanted to record an album, you had to go to a studio. And if you wanted a good album, you had to go to a good studio, right? There weren't home studios in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Not really even in the 90s. And if they were, they were okay, unless someone really had some real money. So you had to spend real money to make an album, right? And so not only do you have to spend real money to make an album, you had to, press records, which are not cheap. And if you had to go through a label system. So before there were downloads, right? Before you could connect to people on the internet at all, you had to have records in physical stores. So think about this for a second. Think about how many, this is the only way to get music, right? Is at the store. How many stores do you have to be in for people around just the state to have access to your music, right? Let's say 50. That doesn't even seem like a lot, right? 50 stores. How many records do you need in each of those stores? Let's just say 10, right? So 10 records in 50 stores, right? And probably people don't realize this, but music has been historically sold on consignment, the same way with magazines and comic books and newspapers, meaning that a store would order a bunch of records and they wouldn't pay for them, right? They would receive them, they would catalog them, they'd put them on the shelves, and when they sold, they would pay the record company for the records, or if they didn't sell, they would turn around and they would ship them back, right? So stores didn't mind. So think about how much money you had to have to step up to the plate regionally, right? Just to step up to the plate. You're talking, I don't know, a minimum of $40,000, $50,000 to record the album, right? And then, another $100,000 just to put your album on the shelf, right? That's what you had. Okay, so late 90s, early 2000s, now I can connect with you on MySpace and you can order a CD from me and I can ship it to you personally, right? So the technology is starting to help me. I recorded my first record in Ray Hughes' basement up in the mountains, right? Because the technology was just getting to that point where it was getting less and less. And I think I did that record for $8,000 or $9,000 and didn't have to spend $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. Now, people still do spend big money on albums now because you want to pay the musicians, you want to spend more time. But, we're getting to the point where, the technology is helpful. So it's getting cheaper to make albums and it's getting easier to put them out. Then you have downloads come along, and now someone in a country that I couldn't necessarily ship CDs to South America or to Russia because they wouldn't necessarily arrive. Right. And also there was the difference in price, the dollar is worth whatever. But now with the downloads, all of a sudden, anyone in the world can buy my album. I can connect with people all over. So it's getting cheaper and cheaper to make, but as this is happening, also I'm making less and less. So I'm selling a CD, right? I'm selling a CD for $16. I can go out and play these tiny little rooms, right? And over the course of a weekend, sell 100, 200 CDs and make $3,000, $4,000. just as kind of a nobody, right? That's gone. That doesn't exist anymore, right? And so I guess what I'm saying is there's this moment in time where, like, if I was born too early, I probably couldn't have done what I do. But then if I was born too late, I could have made the music, but I couldn't have sold it. I couldn't have made money doing it. And so it's like there's this convergence. Okay, so that's a really long way. You can cut all that out if you want to. But what I'm saying is that, like, there was this moment in time that's perfect for me, and it's a real huge privilege for me to get in that moment. So as I'm talking, I don't want people to hear me complaining. Like, I think more what grieves me is like this sort of generation of artists like me when I was 22 who don't have that opportunity. And so I think when an artist like me is complaining about the nature of the industry, people are like, this privileged dude, you have this money, you live in a house, people go to your shows, you make a living. Yes, I do. But what about the like generations of people like me now who are not able to do this?
Yeah.
Right?
And let's think about the ways people resonate with your music too, John Mark, is even just practically, from a song structure standpoint. I think a lot of what you do has built towards a climactic moment in your song, which takes sometimes. I mean, you've got a great riff or something that, Borderlands, where you're going to catch somebody's attention right away.
Sure.
But sometimes that stuff is a little slower burn, right? And so it's going to take the climactic, most meaningful moment is going to take you getting to the bridge of that song. But you couldn't just like plop a clip of the bridge on socials.
Exactly.
Because they're not going to experience everything that came with the verses and choruses. And that seems like such a little thing. We're talking about 3 to 5 minutes of attention that I remember years ago when everything was moving over to digital, and Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd was holding out saying, we're not selling our individual songs because on Dark Side of the Moon, we intended for that to be a singular listening experience that you don't get unless you listen to it all the way through. So someone that makes, whether it's Pink Floyd concept albums, or whether even just like you, where you're not making, here's a 2-minute song that's going to be great for TikTok. I'm making something that's going to take you, we're not talking a lot of time here. It's going to take 3.5, 4 minutes of your attention to get that meaningful sense of awe and wonder. How does somebody that's gifted in that ever find space to share their gift with someone else in this new attention economy?
Exactly. And the reason I said all that earlier about my journey is that I'm probably going to complain, and I want people to realize that, like, I hope they realize this isn't just me like whining about not making more money.
I hear you.
I'm just lucky that people,
next generation.
Yeah. I'm lucky that people recognize my name and I have an audience that can find me even if I'm not making the best content. It's because they have a history with me, and I'm very lucky to have that, right? But let me say this, every artist I know, some of them are working so hard, right? And I'm talking people from like the beginner to the medium level to, I know people who are regularly selling between 2, 4, and 600 cap rooms. And they are all struggling. They're all struggling, right? Because there is almost no really good way to connect with your audience without putting most of your energy into the social media world, right? And I get that some people don't understand why that's a problem. It's a problem because these people want to make really good music. They want to make really good art for you to listen to and to enjoy. And so, but they're making that on fumes because they're putting all their creative energy in to like keeping your attention. And I kind of hate that. I kind of hate that because they're these incredibly talented people, and I want them to thrive, and I want them to have the resources they need to make the things I know they're capable of making. But it literally is the conversation throughout the entire industry about how the way technology has helped make it's cheaper to make music now, but there's so little value in it from a market perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you have to spend so much time on the socials, even just to get the tiny little bit of money out of it. So you end up spending so much more time just trying to maintain the attention than you do actually making the music.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I think I just talked myself into a corner.
No, it's great. Can I add something to this? It's another facet to what you're saying, because, you know, I have a creative collective within the Makers and Mystics podcast, and we get together once a month and do this thing called an artist check-in. And it's basically, we share any wins or any inspiration or challenges that we have, and we just talk with one another. It's digital, but we just got into this conversation recently, and one by one, every single artist on this call, and this is everybody from musicians to filmmakers to choreographers to visual artists, they're people working in all different fields of the arts. And they were all telling me the same thing, that when one person admitted that they were struggling with their mental health because of the pressure to keep up with the algorithm, with the pressure to have to produce, it was having intensely negative effects on their mental health. And when one person admitted that, the whole room broke open, and every single person, not only in music, but in visual art and choreography, all these things as well, everybody was having a therapy moment among ourselves, where we were just realizing, wow, we're all struggling with this. And those are people, John Mark, that I think would, a lot of them would fall into that situation you mentioned, where maybe they didn't come into it when all the stars align, but they're trying to fight uphill just to be able to survive as an artist in this climate. And, you know, that's probably the most concerning thing that I have, is seeing how widespread this situation is having, you know, negative impacts on artists of all kinds.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the ways in which it is changing the incentive structure for what you should make in order to compete in the attention farming economy. So I wonder how many, you know, I'm not in the not so much in the artist world anymore, right? So I don't know what I do. what I even call it. Am I right? I even really I
Cultural
don't like
critique.
the word. Yeah. I don't even like the word content. I don't think it's the best word, but I struggle with, let's say, even when did I put my last book out? So maybe 5 years ago or so, I had, after doing a long podcast series on the problem of evil, a number of people that had been listening to that had said, hey, we'd love, you did this extensive 20-part series. You ever thought about putting it together as a book? I'm like, yeah. So I reached out to some publishers, and the number one thing they wanted to come back to in assessing, do we want to, do something with you, is my social media followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I think I had like 3,000 or something like that on X. I know that this stuff all scales pretty. For some people, that would be like unfathomable. You might be struggling with 100 or 200, and you want to have a larger audience, and 3,000 seems huge to them. In that world, that's nothing, right? I mean, that's inconsequential. So I ended up just kind of doing it on my own and largely focusing it just on my podcast listening audience. I fast forward to like a year ago, and I don't really think I'm a different person at all. I think I've improved in my ability to communicate. I've had just some maturation and increased experience in communication skills, the sorts of things I want to zero in on. And a few years later, I've got some close to, 25,000 followers on X, something like that. And with it, the opportunity to publish a book, because there's interest from publishers that's saying, hey, we see that you have an audience, because they want to know if we're going to invest resources in a writer, and this is the same for record labels too, right? I mean, record labels don't necessarily play the same role they did pre-internet age, but it's still a big deal. Like if you can get signed to a major label that can fund that going into the studio. But it seems like the prerequisite now is that you have to have established on your own a way of gathering attention. And we do know, especially in like post TikTok world, the things that are most likely in a highly competitive attention economy to gather our attention is the stuff that, for lack of a better term, speaks to our lizard brain right away. So it's, can you trigger fight or flight response, right? Can you trigger outrage or fear? Can you get that thing because that's the thing that's on high alert? Can you trigger, how do I put this for like parents who might be listening with small children around? Can you trigger the very, very central integral circuits in our brain that are highly tuned to the desire to reproduce, right? You have these base animal instincts that are always on all the time. And it's that same thing in our brain that we need to have on so that when we're walking through the forest and we see something slithering in the grass, our attention has to be tuned right away. Is that a snake or not? That could kill me. And if it isn't a snake, cool, but I better attend to it right away. Much of the algorithm works on appealing to those same base psychological needs. They are still needs. But it seems like that temptation for an artist, a writer, to be like, I know what it takes to get eyeballs. It's outrage. It's the thing that kicks in the lizard brain. And the problem is, you gather your audience that way, that's the audience you have to retain with the same methods. So you take a temptation for an artist to I see a lot of this with songwriters, John Mark, is they don't necessarily go to that, but they go to like the comedy route now. So they'll do like skits to gain the social media following to then tell people, hey, I also link in bio, I make music. And it's, that's probably better than selling like softcore porn or outrage content, but it still feels like you're going to have to retain your audience that way. And then how does that change you as the artist, as the person having something that you felt was worth sharing?
Yeah, 100%. And you even see it on, like, Spotify runs on an algorithm now as well, right? And so you actually see the nature of songs changing just because of the way people are listening. Like, for instance, it values a quantity over quantity, right? It values a quantity over quality, because the more often you release music on Spotify, the more it brings people in, right? And so what happens is that people start releasing their B-sides, their C-sides, and their D-sides, right? And so what happens when the entire Spotify feed is everyone's like G-level content, right? It's almost like a race to the bottom. And maybe I went a little bit different direction than as far as what you were saying, but how does it change you as a person? Like, I think that, my songs have gotten a lot shorter, and I haven't done that on purpose. I was listening to Smells Like Teen Spirit the other day, a massive cultural pop hit.
Yeah.
A massive hit. Like, we're talking like
most
top
important.
40. I know. Like, and people forget the days when heavy, aggressive rock and roll was in the top 40, not just on rock radio, right? I was listening to it the other day and I was like, they really did that chorus again, didn't they? Like, they're like, this is a long breakdown.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
I have not realized that I have changed my taste. I mean, I still loved it. It wasn't enough to make me not like the song. I didn't dislike it. I just think when I was thinking critically about it, I was like, this was on top 40 radio. And like, they'd do that chorus a little bit long. Like, it was really interesting to me that like they weren't following the pop formula that if I had to reproduce it without listening to it again, I would have reproduced it differently because I remembered it differently than it was, because I had changed. My taste had changed because over time, the algorithm rewarded a little bit shorter song. Don't bore us, get to the chorus. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Right. And so even in music, I'm seeing like my tastes change because the algorithm has rewarded shorter and shorter, faster and faster, get me there quicker, make more sense, happen sooner. And I don't even hate that stuff. Sometimes I like it. Like, I'm not even putting it down. Like, it's neither here or there. I don't think it's bad. But it is fascinating how I can notice how the algorithm has rewired my brain to the fact that I even imagined that song was different than it was, because it hit different when I heard it now versus when I heard it 30 years ago. And I feel like I've read some articles recently that compare how popular songs are becoming more and more similar. And you would think that the technology would encourage creativity and create more diversity in expression, right? But and it is cool in the way that it is allowing things in, like, they're like guitar players in the desert, these roaming tribes of people. They make, and I can listen to that now. I couldn't. So that's there, and that's beautiful. But it also is not necessarily making us more creative. You would think that it's broadening our palette, but it's actually not. It's actually narrowing our palette. And when you look at the top, 100 songs of the last, 10 or 100 years, 10 or 100 last 100 songs of the last 5 years, you see how the top songs are getting more and more similar, not more and more different. And the reason is because we have this real-time data that we didn't used to have. You spend $100,000 to do a radio campaign to realize your song doesn't work, right? Now you can test it on TikTok, and you can know in an afternoon. You put 5 videos out, and you can know in an afternoon which version of the song performs better. And because we have this real-time data, and because people are surprisingly way more similar than we want to admit, our songs are getting more and more like one another. And maybe there's this great singularity where at one point we all just sing the exact same song because we have removed all the little things that make them different from one another. Okay. But this is what I mean when I say the internet is making everything boring and ugly, is that we are all becoming so similar because it's only one or two things that really work. And we all find those things, and then we go copy the people who do those things because we need to get in there too. And then so we all sort of get closer together, and someone squeezes the song even more and makes it even more perfect. And then we all copy that. So we're all moving towards this singular idea, even though you would think that the internet is making us more diverse and making it more, making our palette broader. It's actually making our palette more and more narrower.
Okay, can I throw something in? And then Stephen, I
Please
just don't want to forget this thought here. So I don't want to hog too much conversational time, but I've been thinking about this quite a bit. And I think an interesting comparison is like, when you look at like Formula One racing cars or NASCARs, you don't see a lot of diversity in design, right? Why is that? Because they've figured out the optimal way to do something to win the game. And if you kind of process this through like a game theory lens, there's some interesting stuff even happening in sports, right? So in the Moneyball cultural change in baseball, where analytics became dominant, you had a massive change. And what ended up happening is like most baseball teams play the same way now. The NBA, I'm a big basketball guy. It's the same thing in the NBA. Steph Curry's like 3-point revolution happens. The analytics go, hey, what we want are we want paint shots, and we want 3-pointers, and we want free throws. If it's not one of those things, so then what you get rid of are like the Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant mid-range jumpers. And then all of the teams start looking the same. What you could call it is homogenization. Homogenization, as somebody figures out the optimal way to play the game, is this way. This way wins the game. And I hate making art seem like that, but art, there is competition in it because there's only a limited amount of attention. that can be given to a piece of art at any given time. You go to the movie theater and you see 10 options. You can only pick one to watch at one time. So which one is going to be worthy of your attention? And so I think what you're talking about, John Mark, is even just like as the internet has opened us up to more options, it's also revealed potentially that there is like a Moneyball way of playing the game. And what that leads to is homogenization up until, so we could call this like the Wembanyama effect. So Victor Wembanyama in the NBA, you get like a mutation, an abnormality in the game, right? And you get a guy like Victor Wembanyama coming over from France, who's like 7'5" and can shoot like Steph. And all of the sudden, like the way the game worked before, you insert a mutation into it, right? And now the conditions of the game have changed in such a way that that's where you get variation. And you go, oh, that style, it will become obsolete. So people complain about kind of the global monoculture of the West spreading, right? Are we moving towards, I think a lot of, even this has so much connections even to even the political and like nationalist movements. What are nationalist movements? They're in large part a reaction to the sense of the monoculture globalization. We don't want to be all one thing. But the problem is like American culture is really, really good. Like we won the Cold War. So Coca-Cola, Nikes, McDonald's, they all won the game in some sense. So you get copycats of that. And unless there is something that shakes up the game, I do think it tends towards a sort of homogenization. I do think you see that with music. I think you see that even with film. You know, I love the superhero movies, but there is a sense in which like the Marvel formula has dominated the box office. And up until like this year was the first year, I believe, and I forget how long, that a superhero movie was not the number one domestic box office winner. And so you're getting things where it's like an artist takes a creative risk in something like Sinners, or what's another movie that's really landed well? I haven't seen this yet, but like Weapons, you know, you're getting some things that are like standalone movies, not part of a franchise. And it's kind of like introducing something else that maybe breaks the homogenization. I know there's a lot there, Stephen. Feel free to riff off of any of that, but I had to get that out while John Mark was talking about it.
Yeah, it's really good. I love this idea of thinking of how optimization leads to homogenization. That's something to really think about. But several threads that both of you were talking about that just have me thinking, and one is just how outrage and drama tend to dominate the attention farming that you're talking about, and what that does to us as human beings. It begins to curate our desires. It begins to tell us what to desire. And it begins to shape us on a very spiritual level. And, you know, something that was interesting to me is Nick Cave was asked by a fan. They asked him, you know, why aren't you a political songwriter? And don't you think that it's time for you to become a political songwriter? And the question itself reveals what is expected of musicians these days. It's like, you know, we have a steady diet of outrage and drama that is presented to us. And so this fan who loved his work basically said, hey man, don't you see where the train is going? You need to get on this train. You need to write songs with outrage. And Nick responded, and he said, I wish I could write political songs. There are some really good ones out there. It would all be much simpler, more certain and dependable. Get up in the morning, go online, get enraged, turn it into verse, inspire thousands, change the world. But I'm just not that kind of songwriter. And here's the line that this is the money line. He says, I'm not trying to save the world. I'm trying to save the soul of the world. Oh my gosh. You know, And when I heard Nick say that, it was just like a light bulb went off into me. And I think a lot of what we're dealing with is that when human life becomes templatized, when the optimization becomes homogenization and our human lives become templatized, it's no longer a social issue. It's an anthropological issue. It's a spiritual issue. It gets into, for those of us coming from a similar place, it gets into what it means to bear the image of God, and it gets into who is forming us spiritually. How are these things forming us spiritually? What are the desires that are being curated in us? And who's really the man behind the curtain, so to speak? And so I love Nick's response, because he says, I'm not trying to save the world. And I think that that's the expectation, that we all have to either be telling the rest of the world how messed up the world is, and that we are on the right side of the fight, right? And therefore we are trying to save the world. But Nick kind of bypasses that whole paradigm, and he says, actually, I'm not trying to save the world. I'm trying to save the soul of the world. And I think that a lot of the conversation we're having here hits at that very thing, that it's like there is something beneath this, all of this, that is valuable. It's something that finds its way through the arts. You see it so much through the arts. That's why even with Marvel films, it's like, yeah, sure, there are structures that work, and we can work inside of a structure and still find those anomalies, the 7-foot tall anomalies in our work, without becoming homogenized. But I think that it's such a subtlety that's happening. Even like you said, John Mark, you just woke up one day and realized that the way you were writing songs had changed. And I think that is the concern, is that when we just follow along, it's such a subtle erosion that we don't realize that after months and months of time, we've actually given away a ton of agency that we didn't even realize that we had given. And so I don't know.
Okay.
And
giving away agency. That really resonates with me, Stephen. I feel like that, boy, can we sit with that for a moment? I don't know if you were going to tag on that or not, John Mark, because that
go for it.
That just nails something. the homogenization, and then the pressure to conform, right, to the homogenized pressures. The thing that it decreases in people is a sense of agency, because it's a constriction of the possible domains in which you can speak to, create into. And so if you're like I was just thinking the other day, like if you're a filmmaker with like Christopher Nolan proclivities, who has, I've heard he doesn't even have an email address. I don't know, maybe that's just folklore, right? Christopher Nolan is not on, yeah, he's not on social media. All of his attention goes into, whether you like him or not, they go into films that provoke thought and deeply resonate with people. So if you have that desire, or you want to be, a John Mark McMillan who's writing deeply moving, spiritually transformative music, and yet the pressures of homogenization feel like you can't do that, it also feels like you've lost agency. And one of the things I know kind of in my work with the Human Flourishing Lab and collaborating with psychologists and behavioral scientists is a lack of agency is one of the clear indicators of depression and anxiety. So if you decrease the sense that you have agency, it increases depressive mood. So in other words, to flip it the other way, higher agency, like I have a story that I'm participating in and I'm going somewhere, increases our sense of meaning. And so you're naming something there that I wanted to just kind of like double click on there for a moment.
Yep. The other thing I think that struck me while you were talking, Stephen, is how it seems like everything has to serve a function, right?
Yeah.
Like and my definition of beauty is anything that deserves to exist beyond its function. You know, like if I have my granny used to have these giant spoons on the wall because she thought they were beautiful. They technically functioned as spoons, right? You could use it, but the function wasn't the reason they existed. They existed because she thought they were beautiful. And to me, it's like things can function and they can be beautiful, right? Like maybe this isn't the greatest example, but think of the Joker movie. Like Joaquin Phoenix made a superhero movie because he wanted to make another movie, but it had to function in a world that only appreciates pre-existing IP. And so he's like, all right, we're going to make the Joker movie, but really we're making Taxi Driver, right? And you could argue how beautiful that movie is, but it was beautiful per my definition of beauty, right? It was worth it. Had it not been connected to Batman and the Joker, I would have seen the movie and felt the same way about it. But in order to get it through the door, it had to, cosplay as, that's funny, actually, it had to cosplay as a superhero movie, right? In order to get through the door, But when you're talking about political music, this is what bothers me so much about the swing towards politics in music, is that it's not that music can't or shouldn't be political, but it's like, it seems like music or art is only valued now based on how well it functions. So it's like I could make something very stupid, very ugly, and very boring, but if it got the job done, then it's okay. Or I could make something very beautiful that doesn't push anyone's agenda forward, and it's considered to have no value because it won't do what people need it to do. And I felt this growing up in Christian music, right? Like, there was no question, like, is it beautiful? It's like, doesn't matter. Does it say the right thing? Does it carry the message with it? Then it's valued, right? And it always frustrated me because I don't want to make music that exists just to push an agenda or a message forward. I want to make beautiful music, and hopefully maybe it does move, the needle forward in meaningful ways, but that's not the reason it exists. But now I feel that in the political arena, that like, if you're not saying something, if you're not promoting someone's agenda, there's no value. But see, that's not beauty. Beauty, that's advertising, right? That's marketing. That's like a TV, that's a commercial, right? A commercial, music on a commercial sounds very much like music anywhere else, but it's not the same, because the purpose of the music in the commercial is first and foremost to sell an idea, right? But the music that I like to listen to, maybe it does sell ideas, but it doesn't exist to sell ideas, right? But it seems like the internet has created a culture that only knows how to value advertising.
So if that's what we feel, because I feel it on the receiving end too, right? We are more advertised than any prior human generation. I mean, just think of the differences between our grandparents' generation, who maybe even when they were driving down, there was barely even freeways, right? That's a post-war World War II phenomenon to have a freeway, much less billboards then on the freeway asking you, trade off your attention, which you should probably be given to the road, to someone selling you, toilet paper, or, please take me as your injury malpractice, lawyer, to commercial advertisements, right? And even like the early days of cable TV was selling you paid a subscription for cable TV so that you wouldn't get ads, right? And then they inserted ads there. And then every 3 or 4 scrolls, we're getting an ad. So we're overly saturated with advertisement, which I do think puts up some defenses, some psychological defenses, because we always feel like maybe somebody's manipulating us. And yet, as an artist, what you're saying, someone that makes things worth sharing, is it feels like that is the game you have to play to have any conversational space. So I'm wondering, we've named some pain points here. What might be some creative ways of saying, all right, that's the game. but there has to be a way to create a different game. Like, we don't have to play this game. That feels like you can Trojan horse somehow. Like you're saying, you could do a Joker move where you're like, all right, I'm going to play a portion of the game and be like a Trojan horse that goes, once I get inside the game, I'm unfolding here something that you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even see that coming. Or it seems like you have to create different games. I mean, you were kind of hinting at that, Stephen, with, the ways in which people can curate new experiences. I think that's kind of what you've attempt to do with your Breath in the Clay conferences, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, John Mark, you and I have talked about the ways in which, I mean, what does the live experience, when Nirvana became Nirvana, it wasn't because they had a viral song first. It's because they were developing a name in a local scene in Seattle. And there was energy and there was a collective experience being shared when people would come to those concerts,
Mm-hmm.
which then they had Bleach as that early demo record, essentially, gave them the opportunity to then get a bigger record deal. But there was an energy behind a real inhuman experience, not inhuman, but in person, a human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, ideas. What are you guys processing as you're thinking about either how am I going to play this game differently, or how can we create like a new game entirely?
Yeah. I'll give you a quick response to that and then pass the mic to you, John Mark. But, we've even talked about this in our planning for the Breath in the Clay events, because we've asked ourselves the question, what can we offer for the live experience that you can't get online? And, what is it that would draw people genuinely to come and be a part of this weekend with us that you just couldn't get online? And so it's not the messages, it's not necessarily the our version of TED Talks, it's not the music. I mean, sure, names, of course, always draw people in whatever context you're in, but it's not even really that. The thing that we've learned, and this is through real-time data of polls that I've given to the audience and talking to other people that have been there, the community aspect and the opportunity to be with one another in an environment, a curated environment that is put together, that is the one thing that makes the difference for so many people. In fact, people have written to me and they said, we love the performances, we love the talks, we love the workshops, everything, but we want more time with each other. We just want more time with each other. And so I think, again, analog is the new punk rock. It's something about, it's not just getting together, but it's about getting together in an environment that has been crafted and created as a work of art itself. I think there's something to that. And I think that's why I love the idea even of hosting concerts in random spaces and doing things that it creates its own game, if we want to use that language. Like, you've heard of these restaurants that they don't advertise. You have to know somebody and you have to have a card to be able, in New York City and different places, like these hidden little restaurants that they're not trying to tell the whole world about it. But if then you're on the inside track, and I think that, I don't know, something about that counters the machine in a beautiful way, is just, going after things that's not playing into the same end result that maybe it's imposed upon us that we all want. Maybe there's a different end game, and that helps us to create a different rule to the game.
Seems like what you're saying there is that the thing that we continually get that might hit our dopaminergic system, right? Like, we're getting dopamine hits all the time, so we don't need to go someplace to get more dopamine hits.
Yeah.
What we might be offering are experiences which speak to the deep needs that aren't being addressed in the other game.
Yes.
So when you talk about people
Absolutely.
getting together and saying, we got face-to-face conversations, we're sharing meals together, not just like hanging out, but there seems to be a purpose to it. And there's something happening here that can't happen elsewhere. that seems like a very strong appeal. How do we address a core human need that can't be addressed in, let's say, game A? We're making game B over here that speaks to those needs.
I was passing the mic to you.
Yeah. I feel like I've struggled with this because I feel like I've tried a lot of different things. So, I don't really know. You know, I don't really know. I think that I think I'm gonna take this in another direction. You guys can reel me back in. You do a good job of that anyway, reeling me back in. But I think that people probably also need to remember that we don't just create things for attention, obviously, but we also don't just create things for market value, right? And that's hard because it is hard to make stuff when you can't afford to make it, right? But I think that we have to begin to remind people that the beginning of all of this, like what we're talking about is actually not a new phenomenon. It's just become incredibly heightened in the last 10 years, but this idea of like, how do I make something that hits? I mean, it's the age old, like, even in the 90s, is it better to burn out or fade away? What is, like, is you're going to sell out. Remember in the 90s, the word was sell out. You're going to sell out.
Right?
Yeah. We've been talking about this. This is not a new conversation. It's just that the technology has like, distilled it into its like final form, right? It's like evolved into its like like Dr. Manhattan version, right? It's just like the ultimate form of it's the ultimate what am I trying to say here? It's the ultimate form of the challenge presented to an artist who exists in a free market economy, right? And like, I'm all for free market. I'm really not like, I'm really not a communist, but I think that it's okay to say that some of the biggest challenges that we face as artists is that we feel like we're only valued if there's a dollar sign connected to what we do.
Yeah.
And I think, so I don't know how we're going to go back and make our music and our art more commercially viable in a world where like where the oh my gosh, guys, I feel like I'm out of it this morning, but I don't know how we're going to go back to I don't know how we're going to make our artwork more commercially viable in a world where the attention economy is the dominant economy. I think we can try some other things. I think things will work to a degree, and I agree with Stephen. I think it's relational. But I think more than anything, it'll help people to remember that it's okay to make beautiful things just because it's beautiful.
That's good.
Right? It's okay to make beautiful things just because it's beautiful. It's okay to go to the Grand Canyon because it's beautiful. You don't have to film it and put it on the internet. It's okay to go to Paris and enjoy the architecture without filming it. Right? It's okay to enjoy the beauty in the world. And that's really what we're talking about, is we have commoditized the entire world. We've commoditized the entire human experience by the way that the algorithm has forced us to share every aspect of our lives in order to feel seen by other human beings.
Yeah.
Right.
Byung-Chul Han talks about this.
And I feel like, sorry, go ahead.
Byung-Chul Han talks about this idea that, I'm forgetting his exact terminology, but essentially he argues in one of his, he's got 5 or 6 really short books that are great reads, but he argues that we don't need like the idea of tyranny in the modern age being some sort of like massive oppressive 1984 style government that's going to control your thoughts is not what he sees as likely as all of us self-exploiting ourselves constantly and continually, so that we are essentially, this isn't his exact language, but we become slaves to our own sense that we're a brand that we have to sell in order to gain some sort of social acceptance. And so everything becomes a brand, right? My life becomes a brand.
I have something to say about that.
Please do.
Is people forget where the term brand comes from, right? A brand was what a farmer burned into a cow to let everyone know that that cow belonged to him. So when you become a brand, what is being burned into you to remind the world that you belong to who? Right? When you become a brand, you're doing things in a way to remind the world that you belong to someone else. Who is it that you belong to?
Yeah, that's good.
Who has burned their symbol on your ass? Can I say that on your podcast? Well, who has burned their symbol on you, on your body, on your butt, to remind the world that you are owned, right? You branded a cow to remind your neighbors that if it got out of the fence, that it belonged to you, that you owned the cow, right? So what are we owned by when you become a brand? Who owns you when you become a brand?
So I have a really interesting story I want to share that may at first seem like, where the heck is Stephen going with this? But it really responds to the question, Paul, that you're asking, and it responds to what you're saying here, John Mark, about the brand. And I've been studying this performance recently that Marina Abramovic did in 1974. If you guys know who she is, she's a wild performance artist, very controversial. She's done some extreme and some extremely bizarre things. And I love her, even though her material is sometimes really hard to take in. But she did a performance in 1974 called Rhythm O. And the performance was intended to get at what really is at the core of humanity. Are we inherently good, or are we inherently evil? What is underneath the surface? What owns us as human beings, right? What brands us, if you want to put that language on it? And what she did is she set up 72 items in an art gallery around her, and she gave instructions that basically, she said, you can do anything to me that you want to do with the items that I have provided, and I take full responsibility. I surrender my agency to the audience completely. I mean, that in of itself is wild. And the objects that she had were everything from like a feather to a rose, but then a pair of scissors, and then she put a gun on the table and one bullet beside the gun. And she sat there for 6 hours without moving. And she said that at first people would come up and they were shy, but then they would give her a kiss, or then they would put the rose in her hand, or then they would, run the feather across her. But then as people began to get more and more comfortable, someone came up and pricked her with a pin. And then someone else would come up and wipe the tear out of her eye from the pain that she experienced. And then it got really dark because somebody put the bullet in the gun and put the gun in her hand and put the gun to her head. And then people had to intervene and kick the guy out. And it's just this wild human experience, a human experiment. The reason I bring that up in the context of what we're talking about is when we talk about the arts and how can we as artists respond to what's going on. Flannery O'Connor said that when you assume that your audience shares the same beliefs that you do, you can talk in normal language. But if you assume that they do not, she said, for the hard of hearing, you shout, and for the almost blind, you draw large and startling figures. And I think that, in a sense, if we're in a situation, and this is my language, you guys haven't said this, but if we're in a situation where the algorithm could be lulling us to sleep and removing our agency in the same way that Marina Abramovic gave up her agency to show the audience this, see what the arts can do beyond showing us beautiful things, beyond giving us outlets for our outrage. What the arts do is they reflect the human condition back to us. And I think that if we can create contexts where the arts can begin to do that in our modern situation, whether it takes something as extreme as her performance or not, I don't know. But if we can begin to reflect the human condition back to the people engaging our work, I think that we can break the trance of the algorithm. We can begin to see the true value of the arts, as well as the arts can become a vehicle for those deeper connections we talked about, even at the Breath in the Clay, where there's a need that's not being met by the algorithm. And I think that somewhere in the midst of finding ways to allow art to begin to do that again, and allow our art to not just serve the machine. And I know that's very hard when livelihoods are at stake, and that's very hard when we have responsibilities to a community of people. But somehow I think we have to learn how to reflect back the condition to the audience so that we can actually break through some of the problems we've addressed in this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the absence of or decreasing sense of agency, which comes by the continual spiritual formation of us consuming content, oftentimes mindlessly. It feels very disconnected, right? I mean, whether you're on TikTok or whether you're on, Instagram, which has just essentially become TikTok for millennials, no matter the format, in 2016, the TikTok algorithm transformed social media. It used to be a place early on where primarily you were connected in networks of people that you knew were friends of friends. Even in the MySpace days, I remember it was just crazy to think about. They had like your top 10 friends. Do you remember that? Golly, that's a crazy thought to try to pull that off now. Like, who's in my top 10? But it was a
John
network.
Mark, I was in your top 10.
Yeah. Or when someone takes you out of the top 10, you're like,
Yes.
what?
I know. What did I do?
You're still offended.
You're like, I had to rotate Fred back on because I can only have 10.
Yeah.
And so...
Yeah, that transformed though. Like it was a network. It really was a social network. 2016, the TikTok algorithm figures out how to capture attention in a way that is arguably one of the most transformative spiritual formation tools humans have ever invented. Figure out what you like, figure out what you want, give you more of that over and over and over again. And now, primarily, most of our feeds, unless you move away from the For You page to only who you follow, right? Most of what's on our feed is probably people we don't even know, right? So we're being thought colonized. We're being spiritually formed in such a way that I think when we want to get to the problem of solutions, there's the user side solution, right? We've got to develop spiritual disciplines and practices that, from my vantage point, don't just like throw these out. I can see people making an argument of just going like, I'm going off the grid. But if you don't choose that route, I think you need to have other guardrails in place, from things like, you put your own screen time limits on your apps. So you go like a decent amount for me today to stay connected with my friends and seeing what's going on in the world, whatever that time limit may be. I'm giving myself 15 minutes. And when it hits, like many of us, we have teenage children, with screen time limits. we got to do those things to ourselves. Or even, I know some people go, I don't have any social media on my phone. And I put it on my phone. I download it from the App Store on Fridays. And I'll allow myself on a Friday night or a Saturday to do some mindless scrolling. So I think that's one possible strategy, or several, for decreasing the sense in which this stuff is shaping us. But also thinking about the ways in which we can speak to the real needs of people in such a way that I think when people experience something meaningful, they do share it. And there are methods of sharing. I mean, John Mark, you mentioned this to me, maybe Stephen, you did years ago. It's like, yeah, people have email lists, right, for staying connected with people either they know or are loosely interested in their work. But I think a lot of the data I've seen is the best method for sharing something of value is actually via text message, right? Mm-hmm. And so the text message is kind of a deeper layer of trust that you don't give your phone number away to everybody. So making the sorts of meaningful things that I'll do it to you guys sometimes. I'll be like, man, I saw this lecture, or I listened to this podcast, or man, did you guys hear this song? And if it's really meaningful to me, I send it to you in a text. And I don't know. I think there's still a way to make things. We still have plenty of avenues for connection, but it's getting at the things that really speak to human needs that I think if it's really, really meaningful, people will share it. I'm just curious about the ways in which we could create other avenues of sharing. And I think the live in-person experience is also really vital. I think what you're doing, Stephen, is vital. John Mark, I know it's like, I don't know, the market dynamics of doing a tour is very different than what it was 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. But the experience of what happens in that setting is irreplaceable, right? You're offering something different that speaks to real, deep human needs. For both of you, what do you think are like the human needs you most feel attracted to speaking to? That might take some metacognition to reflect on the things that you're making.
Mm-hmm. Can I answer first? And I need to pause for 1 second because I'm going to have to jump soon for another meeting, but I didn't want to interrupt the vibe here. So I don't know how you tie things up, but can I answer that really quickly?
Yeah, feel free.
One of the needs that I see, and again, this goes back to our community, is the epidemic of loneliness, is addressing loneliness and how that it's so bizarre that we're more connected than we ever have been. And yet at the same time, loneliness and depression are so rampant. And that's something that I see so much of, and that's why even our monthly artist check-ins that I mentioned earlier, it seems valuable to the people that come on there because it's just reminding ourselves that we're not alone and that, that there are ways to continue connecting in meaningful ways. And I think for me, that's one thing that feels very pertinent to address right now is the epidemic of loneliness. And then along with that, the nature of the work that I do really connects the spiritual and the creative together, and how our spiritual needs and our creative needs, function together. But that's kind of where my heart takes
That's great,
me.
Stephen. We'll let you drop out here, and John Markle and I will wrap up. But thanks, Stephen.
All right,
we'll be in touch, man.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So, John Mark, what do you feel like for you is the thing that you're like, I feel like I'm most wanting to address this range of human needs. I feel most attracted to solving this problem or helping people experience something that, what is it?
Yeah, I do. I agree with Stephen that I think loneliness is it is a huge problem. And I think that, not to use a bunch of big language, you can help me out here, but, like we more and more live in a disembodied world, right? Or like I'm working, and none of this is bad in and of itself, there's some good things to it, but, I'm working at home. I'm doing Zoom meetings. I'm getting my entertainment fed to me through my phone. I'm having these relationships through text message. All that's great, man. You know, I keep up with you. You live in the middle of the country. I'm on the East Coast. I got friends in California. It's so wonderful to keep up
It
with
is.
all you guys through text.
Yeah.
But it's like I have this. I hang out with some buddies every Thursday night. It's one of the best parts of my week. But I've heard that people don't do that anymore. Like I've heard that people. I've read some statistics about friendship, even among younger people. You know, how they don't spend time with other people. So I think for me, like I would love to help people get in the room with other human bodies.
Yeah.
Even like this might sound weird, and I hope this doesn't sound creepy, but like I think people need to, in a very appropriate way, even like touch other people.
Absolutely.
I mean, like hugs and handshakes. I don't mean anything weird or sexual. Please hear me. I feel like you got to be careful when you say stuff like that because the world is so hypersexualized. They feel like that's what I'm talking about. But I think people need to walk into rooms where there is no elbow room and you have to politely slide past other human bodies and you have to smell other people. I mean, seriously, like that was rock and roll to me when I was a kid. Going to shows where like when the crowd moved, you moved because you were being pushed around.
For the mosh
You
pit.
know, the mosh pit. Maybe I'm being a little over the top about it, but I would love to get human bodies in a room together where they can hear and see each other. I have like 100 different ideas. None of these have anything to do with my career. It's all just stuff I would love to do. I'd love to do like a beer and hymns night at a local pub, right? Beer and hymns, like come sing at a local pub. No sound system. I'm not going to sing any original songs. It's not about me. Hopefully you don't even know who I am as an artist or whatever. Like I don't want you to come because I'm singing. I want you to come because people don't get in a room and sing together much. People don't do that much anymore. Or like I'd love to just have moments where in public we sing songs together, you know. And it could be worship, right? I mean, it could be worship, or we could just get together and sing like Coldplay songs or whatever, but just where people, you know, I don't think people do that much anymore. And I think it'd be kind of a novelty to like get your body in a room with another 10, 20, 100 other bodies. And let's just sing songs, not to be entertained, but because it feels really, really good to do that together.
Yeah.
I would love to do that.
Emil Durkheim talked about, you know, he was like a very interesting sociologist that was kind of interested in a range of things, including like what gave people the religious experience. Like what, if we were to describe what's a spiritual experience, could we break it down to some component parts or ingredients? One of the things he identified was something he called collective effervescence. So it was this thing in which you as an individual could certainly go out and have a hike in the mountains and experience a sense of individual awe. But collective effervescence was different. It was the experience that you had being in a group with other people and all of you caught up in some sort of collective awe. And Jonathan Haidt calls this like the hive switch, right? There seems to be something in humans that, yeah, we're maybe part chimp, right? But we're also somewhere in us maybe part bee, right? There is something about when humans get together in groups, whether you're at a sporting event, a school pet fest, you know, and all of a sudden there's a unified purpose, or if I might, a spirit in that room that unites us all together. I think that's a lot of, I hate to bring up a difficult subject, but I think that's what a lot of us felt maybe was most missing during the pandemic years, whether it was church or a concert, or even something as seemingly insignificant as going to, when coming out of the pandemic, I said, you know what, I'm going to take my son to a pro wrestling match, because I remembered that as a kid. Going to a pro wrestling match is different than almost any other experience. So you have this interaction, going to the theater, all of those things. And what am I looking for? It's not just the individual sense of awe and wonder that I can get outdoors or, listening to a piece of music by myself, but the process in which I share that together. So I think Durkheim nailed something there. Like that collective effervescence does speak to some deep religious, spiritual need that we have. And anything we can do to kind of like get people together to have that, I think there's a strong, strong desire for that, especially coming out of the pandemic years of going, that's something that we're missing. Even doing this, I've got an increasing desire, and there's financial constrictions to this. I love doing this, but I would much rather have flown you and Steven out or flown out to be with you guys in a room together. And then maybe even there's just like 5-10 other people in there that you kind of like have some other engagement with. And people might go, well, you guys are just talking. What's the difference? I feel the difference. And even when I watch other podcasts, I can tell a difference between when people are sitting in a room together. It sounds wooey, but I think there's a lot of actual like behavioral cognitive science, neuroscience that backs this up. Even things like I think they call it neural coupling. When you're sitting in a room together, your brain waves after a period of time of conversation can start to sync up. We know definitively this happens with storytelling. And when someone is telling a story and they're a listener, there is a syncing, a neural coupling that happens. It's really, really fascinating. So you can't get that from like the infinite scroll. And the other thing you can't get, John Mark, is you can't get a cohesive, coherent narrative. So that's the other thing that feels like it's absent when even if I follow a lot of really interesting accounts and I'm going like, oh man, this like John Mark's talking about music. The next thing I see is, like a scientist who's telling me some really interesting science fact. But then the next thing I see is like a comedian. It's like a Theo Von clip or something. All really like interesting, hits something in me that I like, but it doesn't tell me a story. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. I know we'll do more of it together, but like, what does it look like for people to share an experience, to get into like a shared story together? I think that kind of gets to maybe there's a different game that could be played than our sinking of attention into, I just spent 3 hours making a bunch of clips that might get, I don't know, it might get 1,000 views, it might get 100,000. I don't know what those views mean. I don't know if they're meaningful to people.
Well, this is definitely connected to what we're talking about. This isn't but it is a whole new can of worms. This may be a whole nother podcast, but I wonder if this is maybe driving the rise in church.
Yeah.
I wonder if this is a huge factor, because think about it, like maybe at school, you go to the football games or whatever, but generally outside of that, where in real life do you go to experience that? What's it called? Corporate effervescence? What do you
collective
call
effervescence?
Collective. Where would you go to experience that? And like this is an issue I'm having right now. I don't call it an issue, but this is a challenge I'm having right now, is that the only places in most cities that will let you come do that, they want to sell alcohol. And I don't have any problem with selling alcohol, but then that means they don't make it easy for people who are underage to come be part of that.
Yeah.
And so it's like generally the only place in your life that you have to experience that is church. And there's a lot of kids growing up who don't go to church. So like, it's outrageous to me that there's a whole generation of people who might have never even experienced that collective effervescence even one time, even once have ever experienced that, And so church is one of the last places you're going to experience that, at least on a regular basis. You go to a basketball game, you still got to buy tickets, you still got to, but in just sort of regular life, where can you just go? Where can you just show up and experience that? So I wonder if that's part of what's driving the rise in church among younger people. I saw you posting about that recently.
Yeah.
And I also wonder if that's part of what's driving people from modern expressions of Christianity sort of back into more, I want to say traditional, but that's not quite the word, more contemplative, liturgical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and I realized I was thinking about this the other day. I've got a lot of friends who are, I've got a couple of friends who have decided to become Catholic. I've got friends who are going to Orthodox churches, and this is something I didn't hear about 10 years ago, like at all. And so super fascinating. I was like, I wonder why. And I realized that the version of church I grew up in did not value beauty at all. Everything was either only had a function, or it wasn't part of the expression.
Yeah.
And so I promise all this is connected.
No.
But I think maybe this is it's sort of it's sort of peaking. That the world has sort of lost its, doesn't have enough attention for beauty, and people are looking for it. And I think people are finding it in these really sort of older expressions of church where beauty actually really is part of the liturgy. You sing things that you don't know what you're saying because it's beautiful. You do things that don't have as far as I know, I don't know that the incense has some magical property to it. I think it's just part of an expression of beauty. Right. And it has meaning, but it's not like we sing this song because it has this message, because it points us in this direction. It's like you do beautiful things in a liturgical, contemplative moment because they're beautiful in a religious way.
Yeah. I think,
and I wonder if that's part
your
of
state of consciousness too.
It does.
Right. I mean, that feels like really strong. I'm not saying they're, lacing the incense with any hallucinogens or anything like that. But even just stepping into a place with a different smell breaks you out of your kind of normative framing. Different rituals that aren't part of your day-to-day normal American experience. It breaks up that framing. So you come into a space that looks different. It disorients you a little bit. You maybe hear things that are in, I think, probably among some of your friends that have made that, they call it crossing the Tiber and becoming Catholic. I bet many of them are attracted to going to a mass that is, if you can still find one, is just all in Latin, right? I know among some of my Catholic friends, there's like pretty sharp debates about the loss of kind of the Latin mass, and a lot of Catholics going more almost feeling like their worship is quasi-evangelical with contemporary music and stuff. But there is something about that. It's kind of like it breaks up our attentional framing, right? And I think that's something else that's really important. Is a lot of what we're talking about, the through thread, is that attention is a limited resource. We can only give it so far and so deep, and we live with and subject ourselves to an increasing range of attentional demands, which we don't have more attention to give. Like, we don't have more attention to give than what our ancestors did and our grandparents did. There's just a lot more options for what our attention can go to, and technologies that are finely tuned to locking our attention in ways that has made huge leaps since the Mad Men days of advertising, which that's kind of what they were toying with in Mad Men, right? How do we capture people's attention? We've got powerful algorithms that are probably the most powerful attention harvesting technologies maybe the world human experience has ever seen before. And so I think at the core, it's like, what do we do? What's worthy of our attention? I mean, that's the ultimate religious question, right?
Yeah.
What's worthy of my attention? What should it go to? And then if I make something that's worth sharing, and I think it's worth sharing, what I'm saying is this is worthy of your attention. And I think for you, John Mark, I always see in over the years I've known you, and even before I knew you and just following your work, that you have you kind of have like an upward gaze to the way in which your music is calling people's attention beyond where they are, like in that moment. And that's why it's probably, not to psychoanalyze you here publicly, but that's probably why things like the pressures to be like well, why aren't you an activist in your music?
Yeah.
It's
I
like,
know.
for you, your calling is upward attention. You know,
Yeah.
it's that openness. It's like upward, higher. What's the highest thing worthy of my attention? And so even just
Mhm.
feeling like there could be worthwhile causes that you're like, yeah, give your attention to this. You know, you guys have done on your tours some awesome in between sets, right? Like with Citizens,
Yeah.
you were just on tour with, drawing people's attention to the work of justice in the world.
Yeah.
But I can imagine that tension for someone that's like, oh, I want to draw your gaze upward, higher, more open, more beauty.
Yep.
That's hard.
Well, also, I think we take for granted that we all believe justice matters, right?
Oh, for sure. Right.
Like, I think we take it for granted and we forget that, like, there's a reason other human beings should matter to us, right? And that reason is higher than the function of activism. That reason is higher than justice. You probably have a way better way to say it, but like, a human being matters, and I believe a human being matters. But why do I believe a human being matters? And I'm more interested in that why, right? I mean, I'm interested in the how as well, but I feel like without the why, the how breaks down. So it's not like I'm ignoring the how for the why.
Somebody has to give the why, though.
Exactly. And so even recently, I saw someone posted something about how bad Christian worship music was. And they're very smart. Like, they made a very valid, they seemed like they were making a very valid point. And then the songs that they picked, they said the reason Christian worship music was so terrible is that you could play it in a fascist mansion and it wouldn't make anyone grit their teeth, I think is what he said. I was like, okay, that's interesting. And then the song he played was a protest song, you know, and I was like, I am not against protest songs, right? I'm not saying that the song he brought up, but I'm like, is this my choice? Like, is the only good liturgy protest liturgy? Is that the only thing that matters? I was like, don't we need to have some relationship with the thing that makes protest music matter?
Absolutely.
Because if I can't see the face of God in other human beings, then protest music doesn't matter. And how do I see the face of God in other human beings unless there is a thing beyond us that gives us a value for other people, right? And that's more the land that I am interested in exploring. Is like, what is the land of meaning? Why do I love other people? What is this thing beyond us that gives me love for other people, right? Why does protest music matter, right? If the universe is just molecules bumping into one another, then protest music is irrelevant because human beings don't matter, right? Human beings have to matter. And I think we take for granted that we live in a world that formed those opinions for us, and then we have sort of walked away from that thing, right?
Yeah.
And I want to stay connected to that thing that reminds me that human beings do matter. Otherwise, protest music doesn't matter. And that would be my big qualm I have with that person. It's like, so worship music is irrelevant now, and only protest music matters. And I would say we still need to connect with God in a way that reminds us that other people,
absolutely,
are image bearers, right?
Yeah, you got to know where you're going as opposed to just what you should run away from.
Yeah.
Right. The running away or like moving away towards something, critiquing something is only, we only critique if we know there is some other standard that we're saying this thing misses the mark on. So to be the person that draws our attention to the things that are of ultimate concern isn't like ancillary to a person that has a deep drive for righteousness and justice, and and there's a lot of ways that stuff gets perverted too as well. Yeah, well, man, let's I think that's a good place to put a pin in it for now. I think one other thing that just comes to mind, and I'm just kind of thinking practically about someone who has your proclivities and your aptitudes and your giftings and inclinations, who was born 10 years later and is kind of struggling to figure out, you know, how do I make stuff I think it's worth being heard or being seen or being read. I think maybe one thing people in maybe our positions, which is in various stages of people knowing and feeling like we're relevant, I think there is something we could charge others with to say, if you have that ability already and people are giving you their attention, maybe one way we can improve it is by finding those people, you finding, maybe it's bringing someone on tour, or you're sharing with friends that person that you feel like was just born 10 years after you, right? Do you feel any sense of that? Like, what sorts of sense of responsibility do we have for those that do get gifted a platform to maybe say, oh man, I don't want you to feel like you have to play that game, to be only the protest song, the outrage guy, everything's got to be political in order for you to have a voice. Like, how can we like discover those people, maybe amplify and share them? Do you see there being any value to that? I think that's probably the last question, just as maybe a practical encouragement to the people listening. I feel like you, John Mark, but nobody knows me. Yeah.
Well, from a fan standpoint, I think it's we can choose to support. I mean, I got several Patreons of people that I follow just because I believe in what they're doing. So like that seems like a little thing and it seems like an obvious thing, but there's a lot of people who love what other people are doing and don't maybe think to take any practical steps. But like someone who supports my Patreon, like it's, like it's a little thing, but it's not a little thing, because my Patreon's like $10 a month, $9 or whatever. And I don't sell CDs anymore. So that's a little thing, but, and I have a bunch of other ways that I support what I do, but I'm saying there are people out there, if you really love what they do, any little bit of support goes a really long way. It goes a really long way. And so I think just supporting people you believe are doing beautiful things. I also think it's worth looking for those people, right? Because the world is really full of noise. And lately I've tried to challenge myself to take time and not just leave it up to the algorithm to discover music for me. I've tried really hard to dig into different genres of music and search out things that the algorithm would not actively feed me. Or I even try and trigger the algorithm by like listening to things that are not on my punch list. So it'll start sending me those things. So I think it's important to like have an intention about your listening palette or your reading palette. Like, what is it? I mean, that's what I do. I'm like, what is it I want to, give myself? And so to take responsibility for my own listening so that it's not only on the algorithm. I think it's same for reading. There are authors I like who like, I don't just listen to their book because it's free to listen to on Spotify. I'll go buy it. Recently there's a couple books by Mako Fujimura. I listened to his books and I really enjoyed them. I'm like, I want to have those. And I also want to support the culture. So I went and bought those books, even though I'd already listened to them, but also I realized there's things I want to outline and remember, so I think once you think about it intentionally, I guess the word is intentional.
Yeah.
Right. Is anything you want to grow, be intentional about it, spend a little bit of money on it, spend a little bit of time on it. That's what I try and do. And I do think like, I'm touring with another band called Citizens right now, and they're a great band. And they're fairly established as well. But one reason I'm touring with them is because I also believe in what they do, and I want my audience to know that they're doing it. And so and maybe I need to think more about how with my platform I could introduce people to other people who are making really beautiful stuff. But
Yeah.
I don't know if that was the best answer to your question.
No,
I was
good.
sort of like not sure from a consumer side or from the artist side,
Yeah. Both.
you know,
Both. I think
but
just the sharing, so if you can kind of cut
yeah.
out the algorithm as a middleman and you find something of value that you text to your friend or you email to your
Hmm.
friend, I mean, that's a great way of supporting somebody that you're already,
Yeah.
and I do think there's probably some value in like your own social media feeds. Like
Hmm.
I love, my buddy, um, Parker, set a case out there, and we've done podcasts before. And a few years ago, I think I probably had a larger following than Parker, and I loved sharing Parker's stuff. And now it's totally flipped. I mean,
Wow.
Parker's blown up, and I'm super excited. And I'm going to keep sharing his stuff. And I love the guy, and I love what he's working on. But even just 5 years ago, most of my friends didn't know him. So it'd be like if
Hmm.
I listened to one of his podcasts and it resonated with me, I texted to a friend or share it. And like you're saying, like I became a patron. I know other people have different funding mechanisms, but that is huge. I mean, that is
Hmm.
a practically huge thing. I'm not trying to make a shameless plug for my own patron or for your own. I think we
Sure,
support
sure.
each other. It might just
Yeah,
cancel
we
each
do.
other out. But I
That's
support my
awesome.
friends. I support
Yeah.
you. I support Andy. I support, Parker. There's other people that I go, I know what it's like. And, maybe in the end, it's kind of like washing each other out, but it does make a difference. So if you find somebody that's making
Hmm.
stuff out there, I'm telling you, the algorithm's not paying them. It just isn't.
Hmm.
Um, I don't do ads in my podcasts. You're not sprinkling ads in the middle of your songs, you know, and the streaming revenues, if you aren't aware of this, the streaming revenues from Spotify are not doing for you anything even probably remotely close to like the iTunes days where you were making
Oh,
on a
not even
99
close.
cent
No.
song. If someone bought a 99-cent
Yeah.
song, you were seeing 70 cents of that.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
was like the only way people were
Yep.
getting it. So it's kind of the only way. The patron model feels like one of the few ways that you can say, hey, do your art. Don't feel like you have to play the game. And so anybody listening to this, whether it's not just us, I mean this with all sincerity. Steven's got work out there. If they're making things and you think they're of value, support them in those ways. Sharing, financially supporting. It's really the best thing you can do. And yeah, man, I'm excited. I'm excited for the future and the kind of friends that we have in our networks and kind of brainstorming some ways in which I think I think there's some ways together we can like amplify, we can play a different game. And I don't know, we've talked
Yeah.
about some of those things and I'm excited for them in the future.
Hmm. Yeah. Me too. Me too.